Hello, everyone. Welcome to the PM panel. Today, we have three amazing industry PMs, two of which are now entrepreneurs too. And we're really happy to have them with us today to answer any questions you guys have about the PM career or anything like that. So let's get started and introduce them to you.
You guys can just hop in and introduce yourselves one by one.
Sure. So, hey, everyone. I'm Imam Motamedi. I graduated from Cal in 2014. I was a double business and cognitive science major with a minor in computer science. I spent few years in investment banking and private equity, actually, after college at a place called DBO Partners. Before joining Reddit as a senior product manager, led the launch of Reddit Video, went on to help lead the Reddit redesign, both the creation and the media experiences, and then led Reddit in launching a digital goods ecosystem driven by a currency called Reddit Coins. And then since Reddit, I've started a company called Florian. Florian actually is based in Cal. It works with Cal alumni to give current Berkeley students a really meaningful, flexible, student-friendly alternative to loans, as well as career services from our community of over 100 alumni to help students get ahead in their careers. But thank you so much for having me. Really excited to be a part of this.
Yeah, I can jump in real quickly. Hey, my name is Avinoam Zelenko, and I'm currently a PM over at LinkedIn, and I work on the feed. Part of the feed, essentially, thinking about how to build that sense of community on LinkedIn as part of the feed. I've been a PM for about 10 or so years throughout the journey. I kind of graduated from some rinky-dink college back in Israel, which is where I'm from. Managed to move to New York, back to Israel. And then about 3 years ago, I moved out with Atlassian over here to Mountain View. And at Atlassian, I worked primarily on Confluence. And as part of that, I'm probably the person to blame for the new Confluence Cloud Editor, which was an interesting 2-year project. And yeah, LinkedIn has been something I've been passionate about for a very long time. And it's a little bit like an inception moment. I'm kind of a power user working within the product that I'm somewhat in love with. Yeah, very happy to be here.
Cool. Hey everyone, my name is Neil, and I graduated Cal in 2014. I studied EECS there, and then after Cal, I joined Google in the APM program, which stands for Associate Products Manager. And at Google, I was the PM on both the Android platform, Android Marshmallow, and Google Now, which is kind of like the precursor to the Google Assistant. After those roles, I actually joined Google's incubator called Area 120, which is a startup incubator for Google employees to basically build your own project within Google. And I did 2 projects in Area 120. My first one was called Adver, and it was VR and AR ads. That company was acquired by Google. And then after that, I actually went back to the incubator and worked on a second project, which is my current project called Game Snacks. It's a casual web gaming platform specifically for emerging markets. And I'm kind of like mixture of like tech lead plus PM currently in Area 120. And yeah, super excited to be here. And yeah, thank you.
Thanks so much. So let's get started with our first question. So what is a product manager, and what do you or did you love about being a PM, and what did you dislike?
Avinoam, do you want to kick this one off, given you probably have the most experience of us three in that realm?
Sure, yeah, love to. I'd say the thing, well, what is a product manager? I'd say a product manager ultimately is somebody that's just trying to understand, somebody that knows how to connect the dots, somebody that knows how to understand the why behind why anybody's doing something. Not necessarily just kind of listen to what people are saying or how loudly they're saying it, but Personally, like I got 2 kids, I constantly draw analogies from them. It's not about the tone of which they're saying it or what they're saying exactly. It's understanding why are they saying it, like what's the emotion, what's the background. And ultimately, it's like having a very, very solid problem statement to everything you do. I think from a very personal perspective, what I love about being a PM has always been the absolute disproportionate ability to, like, you never have to be what I call like a big shot to have amazing impact on people's lives. If you want, you can be an IC. If you want, you can become a manager. But it's this very unique position within any company. And I've been to medium companies, I've been to tiny startups where I was the first PM, and now with LinkedIn. That pattern keeps on emerging. So that ability to have like disproportionate impact, which also comes with a lot of responsibility. And I think on the side of disliking, which is probably a little bit less, like it doesn't come up as much probably, or it's like not the fancier part that gets talked about when it comes to being a PM. It can become a bit of a lonely place, and you have to learn to deal with that, and you have to learn how to understand to intentionally like put yourselves in the shadows, let other people on the team shine. It's not about you. It's about the customers first. It's about your colleagues. It's about the people who are actually building stuff. And I've seen, you know, sometimes it could be a place where you work very hard and then you kind of sit on the sidelines. But I think ultimately it's something that grows on you, and it actually helps you mature as a human being, I believe.
Gil, do you want to go next?
Sure, thank you. Yeah, I think I gave a great overview of what is a product manager. So I think I can talk more about what I liked and disliked about it. So what I really like about PM is, and just for some context, I actually just recently switched from PM back to like engineering at Google, like literally like 2 weeks ago. But what I liked about it and what I miss about PMing is I miss or like really being like really close to users. So really understanding what users want, talking to a lot of users, understanding what their problems are. It just feels like you kind of understand your product more. I think oftentimes as an engineer, you're like kind of building things, but you don't really know how people are reacting to it, what they like about it, what they dislike about it. But as a PM, like you're constantly thinking about that. And I really like that because I think that's how you improve products. And I also just love thinking about like how to improve a product and what features you can add. So just like, you know, very concretely, like what is our next priority? What's the most important thing we could build right now? What is something creative that we could do that maybe our competitors aren't doing? That's the kind of thing that I love to think about. In terms of what I don't like about it, this is more perspective, like being a PM at a large company, but I hate like like all the process that's involved with being a PM, because as a PM at a big company, a lot of your role is like really digging through and carving away at all of this process, and you know, going through all the reviews, all the meetings, all the emails. Like a lot of the time you have to do all of that stuff to get stuff done. And that aspect of it can be frustrating. You know, people could disagree with you at the last minute. There's a lot of debates, a lot of random people that you have to convince to do something. So that can be annoying. I think that was probably my least favorite part of the PM role.
Great. Yeah. Thanks so much. Now, like, Iman, like you probably have like a unique perspective to share as well, just coming from like all the different industries you worked in and now like just startup life. So, you know, what did you love you know, about being a PM, and what did you dislike? And perhaps like, how is that a little bit different or the same from like what you're doing now, and like kind of the role and the responsibility you have to take on with that?
Yeah, definitely. I think so. With Florian, we actually had Neil on as a speaker, I think last week, and he made the analogy of a PM as a mini CEO. And I think depending on that company, that can be a very good analogy, in the sense that as a PM, you're defining what the goal you're trying to achieve with your product is, and then trying to create and craft the best way to go about accomplishing that goal. So that means taking in the quantitative research, taking in the qualitative, the user interviews to actually craft a strategy to go about accomplishing that goal, and then actually executing on that strategy. So working with the designers, the engineers to bring that to life. In terms of it at, a Reddit-sized company, what I loved about being a PM goes back to Avinoam's point around the disproportionate impact. You have such a responsibility for the success of that product. You get to wear so many different hats in meeting with these different teams and these stakeholders as part of that. And I think that level of responsibility is something that carries over as well to running your own company, effectively being a PM of your own company. It's almost more heightened in a way in that, if a product I launched at Reddit did phenomenally well, obviously, personally, I would do decently well. It would reflect well upon me in the company. Whereas running your own company, it's almost disproportionately true in terms of the successes it accrues to you, but also vice versa with the failures if something goes wrong. And I think what's interesting about that too is the things that I dislike are actually pretty in parallel with Neil's answer, where effectively as a PM, like anything that falls through the cracks, anything that doesn't fall under the realm of someone else's responsibility, you sort of have to take ownership of. And so there could be this minutia of tasks that you have to take under your wing. And sort of in addition to that, you're also to some degree responsible for making sure what everyone else is assigned gets done and gets done to a pretty high quality. And so there can be a lot going on at any given time that you have to keep track of. And it's not always, the sexiest or the thing that you most want to be working on or the most strategic to the business. And in running your own company, that's also true. One of the things that's nicer is there's less processes. There's obviously less meetings with other stakeholders. And you can be sort of much more ruthless about prioritization because your time is limited. It's much more about, hey, is this the most important thing for the business or not? But I think at its core, it's a lot of the same trade-offs as you think, as you experience as a product manager. And for me, one of the big reasons I decided to pursue product management before starting my own company was I had heard from so many of my mentors that it was great training for actually starting your own company in terms of understanding the user, in terms of, the cliche, build something that people want. And I think it is actually a phenomenal training ground, having gone through that experience myself.
Yeah, that's definitely a very insightful kind of perspective. And I think that what kind of gets overlooked, as Avinoam was mentioning and as you and Neil were mentioning as well, is kind of there are a lot of things that when people come out of college, as Berkeley students, we're thinking we want to get to this level as a PM, but there are also we got to understand there are a lot of other things, a lot of other factors that come into play. You guys talked about if there's something that doesn't fall under someone else's responsibility, you got to own up to that. Also it can also be a very lonely place, like Avinoam said. So I think that this teaches a lot of our listeners here, there's definitely nothing's black and white. There's definitely a lot of gray area to everything in terms of everything's multidimensional. There's a lot of stuff going on. So yeah, thanks for sharing that.
Yeah, absolutely. I think the other big one that we didn't really touch upon is in the same vein as, you have a disproportionate amount of responsibility. If things don't go well, that also really falls on your shoulders. And so I think that level of ownership and responsibility can be tough for a lot of people. There definitely is pressure associated with that. And I wouldn't say, it depends on your company, but I wouldn't say it's your traditional, clock in at 9 o'clock, leave at 5 o'clock, don't take your work home with you. When you're in the middle of a product launch, there's a lot going on and a lot that you have to be mindful of. So as with all roles, I think it definitely comes with its trade-offs.
Yeah. And so go ahead, Avinoam. Yeah.
I was going to say, just to add to that, I feel like the term that has resonated over the years has always been the single neck to ring. It's a very true statement.
Yeah. And I was actually going to it was great that you touched on trade-offs, Iman, because I was actually going to one of our questions is actually the fact that a huge part of being a PM is weighing your options and making those difficult trade-offs. And so we were just wondering what kind of guides your final decision when faced with those trade-offs. And I guess this is a little bit of a vague question, but we kind of like purposely made it so that you guys could talk about like maybe some of the trade-offs you might have faced, or like what are some main trade-offs like some PMs face, like whether that's between like, like responsibility and then also like, the, leadership or like the kind of like influence you have over a project, or whether that's something else. So we were just wondering if you guys could share some insights about that.
Yeah, I can kick things off here, and I'm going to try to answer these through the lens of different experiences I've had, like anecdotes, because I think those are hit home a little bit more. But when I think about trade-offs in this lens, and I'm curious to hear Neil and Avinoam's answers here, but I think about them more in the realm of most of the trade-offs I experienced as a PM came when thinking about a specific feature set. You have a limited amount of time, you have a limited amount of engineering resources. And so you have to be hypercritical about, what makes it into that MVP and sort of what falls by the wayside. One of the more difficult ones I had to make early in my career was, and I think it's instructive in terms of how I think about trade-offs in general, was when we were launching Reddit Video. Reddit at the time was predominantly a desktop site. We had just launched our mobile app. And so there was a strong push toward, for the video uploading experience capability only being on our desktop site. Our leadership had the perspective of, look at YouTube, most of their creators are on the desktop. Do we need to go through all of the engineering effort to also incorporate this capability onto our mobile devices? And at the time, mobile video wasn't this foregone conclusion that it is today. And I think I sort of have this intuition that mobile is the way to go. But I think with all decisions, you need to go to the data, whether qualitative, whether quantitative data, to actually help inform that trade-off. And so for this one, what I did was I actually went and looked at what the current GIF and third-party videos that were being posted on Reddit were. Like what were the quantities of sort of GIFs and YouTube links and other types of third-party video type content. And the vast majority of those, sort of, we looked at it quantitatively, the vast majority of those were mobile recorded video. They weren't, your traditional desktop, super edited 3-minute long video, but they were sort of this 10 to 30 second type video where someone just saw something out in the day, recorded it, uploaded it to Giphy or some other site and reposted it to Reddit. And so armed with that data, was able to make a much more compelling case of why we should start with video. And to this day, last I checked the numbers, like in terms of total videos uploaded to Reddit, 80% come through mobile. And so I think with all of these decisions, like intuition only gets you so far, but data, either quantitative or qualitative, is sort of your best friend in thinking through those trade-offs.
Yeah, perfect. Neil or Avinoam, do you have anything to say about that?
Go ahead, Neil.
Sure. Yeah, I totally agree with Iman on the data aspect. I think that's, often overlooked when making decisions. And I think, people often want to go with their intuition, and a lot of the times the intuition is right, but I think your intuition is kind of built off of everything that you are aware of and everything that you know, which includes prior experiences, but it should be informed by, talking to your users, data, that kind of thing. Another thing I wanted to add, this is something that Jeff Bezos talks about, and, a lot of different opinions on him, but I think he has interesting framework for decision making. There's kind of two things that I've used in the last couple of years that I found useful. So one is he basically says, like, there's two types of decisions that you could make. One type of decision is something that once you make it, like, it's irreversible. Like, you can't undo it. Like, you made a huge mistake. It's going to cost you a lot of money or a lot of users. People are going to be like really pissed at your product. That's one type of decision. And there's another type of decision that, like, probably doesn't matter too much. Like, you either do one thing or the other. Like, if it goes badly, you can always undo it and change it. It doesn't take like a lot of effort. Like, it's reversible essentially. And what he's saying is that, most decisions actually fall under the second category. Like, most decisions are not like a huge deal. You could probably, reverse it. You probably figure out and learn after doing it. I think a lot of teams get stuck in this trap where they keep making these debates over, like, should we do this? Should we do that? But really, like, you should just pick one thing and do it, and like not spend time debating it, and learn from that, and then go on. And document your decision. Like, why did I make this decision? What were the assumptions we made? And I feel like, especially for early stage companies, it's really easy to get caught in these traps. And I think the other thing that helps with this is also another part of this framework is the concept of like disagree and commit, which is like, if you're really having like a standoff with someone, you can't make a decision, like you don't know which trade-off is better, then one person can just say, you know what, like, I disagree with you, these are the reasons why, but let's just go with your approach. Like, I will commit to it. I will do all the work necessary. Like, I will make it happen. I will be fully on board. But I just want to voice that, like, these are my concerns. And so these are just ways to basically, communicate with your team effectively, but still like move forward and make progress. And I feel like just recognizing that that's an option can really help you make decisions like this.
Yeah, just to build on Neil, what you were saying, I think the two-way versus one-way door decision making with disagree and commit is probably one of the most important mechanisms to do effectively, because it feels like, to make an analogy, usually when that happens, you have two parties within an organization arguing, and the third party that's the most important is burning on fire, which is the customer. And the point is, if you can't make a decision fast enough, then you're going to end up hurting who really matters, and you kind of lose sight of what you're actually doing. So I think generally as a PM, when it comes to decision making, like, frameworks all over the place are your best friend and your team's best friend. So when it comes to disagree and commit, I think it's a lot easier said than done. But I think really regardless of what size of company you work at, there are different frameworks around, like, how do you make sure that you can set just artificial timelines. If you've reached an immovable object, you have a certain play that you run, right? It could be every company has their framework, but you can time box it and say, we need to make a decision within 5 days. If within 5 days we can't disagree and commit, you can have a clean escalation path, right? That can go to your manager, can go to somebody else. But the thing is, the idea is, don't mull over it, because there's the important party on the other end is suffering. Make sure to get it out there, figure something out. I think a couple other aspects to decision making, one that's become, I totally agree with what Iman and Neil were saying around data, qualitative, quantitative, so I'll put that aside. Something that's been very helpful upfront and being proactive about is setting very clear principles, whether it's for your group, whether it's for the feature that you're building. It's been one of the most helpful proactive practices to set just a handful of principles. And the thing is, they don't have to be etched in stone. You can always sanity check them based on what you're actually doing, and vice versa. The second question is always, what do we stand to learn if we do this or that? And generally, I think the place that has the highest unit of learning should ultimately be the thing that you want to go towards, because that will ultimately benefit the business and the customer. And the last piece, and I'll take two different approaches. If you're in a bigger company, you can often lean on the core values of that company. So, and they may present it very differently. At Atlassian, one of the core values is don't fuck the customer. And it's very easy to call people out and say, use that. Some people say it's not ambitious enough. At LinkedIn, it's members first, which is a little bit more aspirational. And I think as long as you have that in mind, you're always thinking about not doing things the right way, but you want to make sure you're doing the right thing. And it's very hard to sometimes make the distinction between the two, because as Iman and Neil said, bigger companies, a lot of process, you can't help but focus on doing things the right way versus the right thing. And a very, very straightforward, good old 2x2 framework, which we've used in the past, is before you prioritize your features, just plot how impactful something is going to be on the business versus how happy it's going to make a customer. And each quadrant will actually show you, ideally you want things that are on the top right. If you can't, go to the bottom right, but you can really look yourself in the mirror and say, are we just doing something because there's a top-down pressure to deliver metrics? That's not the right thing to do. That's basically just doing things the right way. So yeah, those are some of my thoughts on that.
Avinaam, I'm curious. There was so much insight in that answer, and the one thing I want to dive a little bit deeper on is your point around the principles for your product or your group. Do you have an example or two from a product or somewhere else that comes to mind of what those principles actually looked like and how they informed your decision making?
Yeah, I'll give you two examples. Like it's examples of two principles out of like four. Previous role, we were working on Confluence, and we were essentially taking an editor that had been used for like a decade by millions of users, and we were switching it. It's like going into the realm of the editor change of WordPress, Microsoft Word. People don't like it when people change their editors. And two of the principles that we had, one was you have to decide, a principle can reflect the trade-off within itself. So one of the principles we had out the gate was saying, makers over consumers, right? We had to understand the double-sided nature of content creation and say, yes, we care about everyone, but if we have to prioritize, we're going to make sure that the people who actually create the supply are going to be more important, because without them, there's not going to be any kind of demand coming through. The second one, and I think analogies are always fun to use because they humanize, because we're all people. And one that we had was called no invisible walls. And that means as a user, nobody likes to walk in a room and bump into an invisible wall or window. It sucks, you get pissed. And no user likes to have that feeling when they're inside a product. So anytime we were going through a flow or making a decision and like, you need to rush and there's pressure and get the feature out, somebody looks and says like, that's gonna be an invisible wall that gives you a bloody nose. So we just wouldn't do it. And the idea is to have them like help keep you honest throughout the process.
Got it. Those are really helpful. I love the no invisible walls one, especially.
So I guess it definitely seems like you guys are, I guess, trained, or like you work in a way that like you try not to have a failure like at all when it comes to like decision making. But have there ever been instances in like your work or any time like in management too where like you've had to actually come face to face with a failure, and then how did you reassess it in that way? I guess we can start with Avino, because it seems like you have a lot of like experience with like, I guess, the way like LinkedIn works with their failure reassessing workflows.
Yeah, it's interesting. There's definitely an experimentation culture at LinkedIn that actually embraces, it doesn't even call it failure, it just embraces like trying something, get the information and rework it. And every company like has their level of being risk averse. I would definitely like fine tune the statement you were saying. I think all of these tactics and frameworks, they're all designed to help you do two things for yourself and for your stakeholders. One is become really good at raising red flags as early as possible. It's probably one of the most underlooked skills any PM can have. And two, always come to the plate with a mitigation plan. You raise the flag with your risk, you never raise a risk without a mitigation plan. And all of those are designed to minimize risk. Like ideally you want to get everything right if you could, but everybody understands it's not possible. And I think that goes back to understanding like, what do we stand to learn if we do something? Inherently, that means learning is not just good stuff. Learning is all the bad stuff. And I can promise you a lot of bad stuff happened at Confluence in every role I've done. And LinkedIn has this amazing experimentation culture of previous VP of product that I worked with at Atlassian, who's actually before that VP of product at LinkedIn. His analogy is like, you want to have as many swings at bat as you can. And ultimately, this may not be related to the question, but generally I think failure is a prerequisite to growing as a PM and as a team. But the parting thought on that is to also like remember failure and things like that don't just need to be measured in like black and white ways, like metrics and business and stuff like that. There's that beautiful saying that at the end of the day, people only remember how you made them feel. So I'd say like when you go in as a PM and you think about like, are you doing good work? Really like don't lose sight of that, because it's such an important part and it's very easy to get bogged down into, you know, did I move this metric by X amount and did I hit my OKRs and things like that?
Yeah. Yeah, I totally agree with what Avinam said. And just to add to that, I think there's also the aspect of failure of like making sure that it's a safe environment to fail in your team, especially for like early stage startups. And one thing that I've been hearing a lot about recently is psychological safety, and how that's like the number one factor that determines like if people are, you know, happy with their current job and work environment. And part of psychological safety is like making it, you know, safe to propose ideas and to fail and be wrong, and creating that environment for that to happen. And I think, you know, when you have a failure like this, it's important to like check in with your team, make sure that, you know, you make it clear that it's not anyone's fault that a decision was made. Like, you made the decision as a team. I think it helps to like document like the decisions and the assumptions that you made. Like, we did this because of X, Y, and Z, which we believed at the time. And obviously, those assumptions can change. And that's why we made the decision. And this kind of happened in my first startup when we were investing in VR. And we really thought, you know, VR was going to be the next big platform. We thought it was going to blow up and every app would be like VR, you know, and that didn't happen. But we already had invested a ton of engineering. We had made a bunch of decisions based on that assumption. And yeah, like, I think it helps to have kind of a culture of like, kind of like a post-mortem. Like, I don't really like that word because it sounds kind of like bleak, but you know, like, we made this decision. Let's look at the assumptions we made. What could we have done better next time? No one's fault. Let's keep going. And if you create that environment, I think it also helps like your team won't be afraid to like propose new ideas, and some of those ideas could be, you know, what you end up doing next. But if you have this culture of like, oh, like, why did you say we did this? Like, I told you I was right. Like, we should have gone with my direction. People are just not going to propose new ideas on your team. And that's really not the culture that you should want to build, I think, both at a small company and a large company. So I think that's kind of more of like a team dynamics perspective, but I still think that's important for like, you know, failure cases.
Yeah, I really like both of those answers. I think when in reflecting on failure as a product manager, you know, I think that the question originally was phrased in a way of like, you know, did you have a product that you've launched and it absolutely flopped? And I think from that lens, like, product as a whole has really moved toward, or a lot of companies have really moved toward sort of this lean startup approach where you're testing and iterating every step of the way. So it's not like, you know, you go through a 6-month development process, launch something without a user having ever seen it, and all of a sudden it flops. And so I think there's a lot written about that that's really worth reading around, you know, landing page tests, painted door tests, and a lot of these other tactics you can use to try to avoid that as much as possible. In my career, at least, in reflecting on like moments of failures, I sort of thought of 2 different buckets. One bucket is just when things like really hit the fan during a product launch in ways that you might not have necessarily expected. One example, you know, from launching video was we were moving from like alpha to beta of our video launch, which meant we were introducing it to more subreddits. And r/video is the biggest video subreddit we introduced it to. Things are going well, and all of a sudden one day they have 60 million users in their community. All of a sudden one day there's a big post on the front of r/video that says, hey, due to issues with the Reddit video beta, we're like pulling out of this beta, and we recommend all other subreddits do the same. And like that, in the day of, that's like a big failure moment, right? That's like, oh, what happened here? Why weren't we aware of this? And obviously you take the steps to try to like mitigate that surprise in a way. And I mean, in that case in particular, it was like one rogue moderator who I found out later had like broken up, his girlfriend had broken up with him that day. And so he messaged me apologizing for this like stint of misguided aggression on his part. And they ended up coming back into the Reddit video beta. But all that to say, like, there are things like that that'll happen all the time. And I wouldn't even call that a failure. I think those are just surprises that come up, and in retrospect they become something that you sort of laugh about, or they're battle scars in a way. I think when I think about personally like a failure that I had at Reddit was actually from products that we didn't work on. There was one product in particular that I was really excited about. It was sort of like a TikTok-esque feature within Reddit video that I wanted to launch. And I do to this day think it still would have gone really well. And I think what that speaks to is, as a PM, it's a lot of influence. And at that point in my career, I was a younger PM. I didn't have a lot of influence within the organization. And so it was hard to actually go ahead and enact this thing. And at the end of the day, companies are made up of people and they're made up of relationships. And so that's why I think, making sure that you're really focused on the relationships, making sure that you find the right ways to influence people. Different people are influenced in different ways. Certain people are data driven, other people are much more qualitatively driven. User stories are really impactful. But I think not losing sight of that fact that, when you look at a company, when you look at Instagram launching Reels a few days ago, it's not like, the organization suddenly just decided to do that and it happened. These are all things that people have to do. And so I think it's important to keep that in mind and think about, hey, how can you get through some of that organizational red tape to accomplish what you want to accomplish?
That's definitely a really interesting point. Like, we never think of like how, I guess it's all up to the customer's mood at the end of the day of how well your product actually goes out into market too. So that's definitely like a really interesting point. And I wanted to, I guess, divulge, because we're having a bit of questions in our live Q&A about this, that what exactly do you guys do as a PM? Like, what is like your day-to-day activities about, like, maybe they're different per company. So maybe like Avinoam, you can talk about how it was different from Atlassian and LinkedIn. And then we can like compare maybe like to see if the operations are the same or not.
Sure. Yeah. No, I don't do anything. I'm just a PM. But I think that's probably the safest thing to say when you're in a room full of engineers. I'm just a PM. But yeah, I'd say, what do I do as a PM? I think like it goes all the way from like you live in the world of like you're constantly going in between breadth and depth and tactical and strategic. And you need to figure out when you need to be in each mode. I think the tactical stuff tends to come up as like, as a PM, spend a lot of time with your engineering design counterparts, do all the good old ceremonies that relate to Scrum, whether it's stand-ups or discovery sessions, pre-planning, planning, retros, super important if we spoke about failure before. And then I think as you get into more of the strategic things, touching on failure again, like post-mortem is great. If you're feeling super overachieving, do a pre-mortem if you want to. It takes a lot of energy. And you're probably going to get it wrong anyways. But I think the more strategic things start to be around as you start to prioritize things and like you try to unblock your team, you try to also help and gain like a longer term focus on where things are going. And usually with that, the bigger the company, you need to collaborate with more people. You can't work on your own. And you need to get buy-in, and like it's a whole process. But I'd say I'll use like a little equation, which is literally 3 words maybe. But I heard this, I was interviewing like 5 years ago at Facebook, and the guy who interviewed me like sold one of his companies to Facebook. And when he asked me what I think a PM was, his response was he drew up like this little formula, and it was focus plus momentum equals magic. And the reason I liked it so much is because like everything a PM needs to do, it's prioritized. The focus comes before the momentum. You can't have momentum if you don't have focus. And I think if you think about it as like your work as a PM, what you give to the org, especially your team that depends on you, it's a really simple way as a PM when you come into work, or if you open your laptop, which is what coming into work looks like today, just ask those 2 questions, and that'll help you navigate and decide where you need to spend most of your time. So the first question is, am I providing focus? If not, there's a list of things that you can do, right? You can do things that are like, do I need to help the team unblock? Do I need to think of something more strategic, give them a better why? If that's solid, and maybe the question is, does the team have momentum? That can go to more tactical things. Where can I jump in? Where can I build a framework to help make faster decisions? How can I help the team disagree and commit? where are we misaligned? Are we misaligned with another team, or do we simply misunderstand another team? But I think ultimately, as you're trying to balance, like, if you've managed to crack that area when you hit like, yes, we all have focus and momentum, that's when it feels like what they say is like a state of flow. And I think that's what that person was talking about is magic. So yeah.
That's a really interesting take on, I guess, like what a PM does and how they operate. So yeah, I guess isn't there's like no real like schedule that you guys go through daily, or can you guys maybe touch light on that? Like, let's say like yesterday or something. What was your day like yesterday? We can go like Iman.
Sure, Neil, did you have something that you were going to say there before I jump in?
Go for it.
So I think for me as a PM, like, if you think about the life cycle of a product, right? It's like you do qualitative research, you do quantitative research. You know, maybe from that you write a spec, you hand the spec off to designers, you work with the designers on the design of a feature. Then designers hand it off to engineering, you help out engineering, you answer any questions, and then ideally you're at a place of launching the feature. And so in any given day as a PM, you inevitably have like 5, 6, 7 of these cycles going on across different features, different products in the company. And so for me, at least as a PM, my average day was spent in each of these different buckets, right? Maybe I start my day with a meeting with my design team where they've taken this spec and they have mock-ups of, you know, what the new feature might look like. The meeting after that maybe is with our user researcher who's doing some user testing around a brand new feature we're thinking about launching. From there, maybe I've carved out like an hour and a half of my schedule to actually like do work, write a spec, get things done, for lack of a better word. And then finally, maybe it's a meeting with engineers to make sure they're making progress on their deliverables. And so that's sort of, whenever I was going through an average day, I sort of had that framework in my head of, hey, there are these features that are being worked on. Here's where we are at in the life cycle. And so constantly between meeting to meeting, I'm context switching a little bit to put a different hat on, to be able to, you know, help unblock that team or help get to a good decision, make sure everyone's heard in that meeting, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera.
Nice. And then it seemed like Neil, you also had something to say about that.
Yeah, I think Abhinav and Iman covered it pretty extensively. I would say, I mean, one of the reasons I did not like PM were kind of like, you know, the monotonous days. And that would be, especially at a big company, you get in, you have like stand-ups, a bunch of meetings, then you're going to go through all of your emails, then you're going to be writing a bunch of docs. Like that's like a pretty standard day. As Avinam said, from the engineer's perspective, they feel like you're doing nothing, even though a lot of that stuff is actually pretty complicated. But if it just looks like you're doing email all day, you know, people are like, well, what are you doing? And that, I mean, it can be great, can feel monotonous too, depending on, you know, your team and the product that you're working on. But yeah, I mean, if you actually break down what those emails are, what those meetings are, what are the docs that you're writing, it's a lot of the stuff that I mean Iman mentioned, like a lot of strategy going on there, user research, like figuring out what features to build, execution, making sure that things are getting done, like prioritizing. So, you know, it depends how you look at it. And I think it also depends a lot on your personality and like your personal preferences about, you know, how you feel about doing those types of things. But yeah, that's kind of what a day as a PM at Google would be like.
Cool, that's great. And really, really great, like kind of insights, because I know we had a lot of questions on Menti about that, and so you guys like answered that in like so much more. So really great perspectives, and kind of like a little bit on that note. On Menti, we're getting a lot of questions about kind of like how people, you know, go through the journey of becoming a PM, and that kind of relates to one of the questions we already came up with. And so like, all right, here. So like, we wanted to kind of like get your perspective as to like, kind of like, I know there are a lot of Berkeley students who are kind of like, they want to be PMs, and just beyond that, just we were wondering if you had any advice for students on like, not just how to break into the PM role, but just on like, you know, like whether or not like, or like how to find out whether that's the right calling for them, or whether that's something that they might be interested in. Like, how do students kind of like assess that, like in, you know, in the middle of their college careers?
Yeah, I can provide some feedback. So yeah, I basically started as a PM right after college, and I know that it's a tricky path because not a lot of companies offer PM roles right after graduating. So there are some programs like Google has a PM program, Facebook has RPM, and then some startups, you know, may be willing to take on an entry level PM, but I think even that is a little tricky. I think in terms of like how you'd prep for something like this, like obviously if you can get an internship as a PM, that would be really helpful. But I think it also, I think there's things that you can do beyond that. So I feel like one is, you know, try to do something on your own. So whether that's like a side project or even like a startup that you do at Berkeley, you'll basically end up doing a lot of stuff that a PM would do anyway. So maybe try hacking on like, you know, the latest technology that's coming out, like GPT-3 or something cool like that. Just try building something with some friends and, you know, see if you can build anything. And along the way, you'll kind of understand what kind of role is interesting to you. I also feel like getting into like the product mindset is something that really helps you get like the PM type roles out of college. So that's like, you know, first just like reading all the like tech news, like Hacker News, Reddit, Twitter, like really getting in that tech mindset. Get like in the mentality where you're like you're constantly thinking about how do I improve like the products that I use every day? Wouldn't it be cool if like Spotify added this? Like, wouldn't it be cool if we built this with GPT-3? Like, if you're constantly thinking about questions like that, that's like a lot of what the PM interviews will ask you. Is like, you know, how would you design this? How would you improve this? So if you're constantly, if you're just already like talking about that stuff with like your friends or like your community at school, like it'll really help you prepare for those interviews. So yeah, that would be, you know, some basic advice for that.
So I guess, do you guys also have any advice like in college, since two of you are Berkeley alums? So do you guys have like any advice like that maybe like you did throughout Berkeley that helped support you in choosing PM as a right starting career path?
Yeah, I think what I'd say there is, you know, I have a lot of respect and sympathy for current students who want to pursue PM, because I do think it's very, very tough to break into right now. It's, you know, we work with a ton of Cal students, and I would say the number one profession that people want to say they want to go into is product management. And inevitably, if you look at the numbers, right, on a given development team, there's one PM for 5 or 6 engineers. So there's a lower supply of those roles available. And to Neil's point, for early stage companies, the founder is going to be acting as the PM in large part. And once they get big enough to hire a PM, they're probably going to want someone with quite a bit of experience. And so I think that for me, the thing, because I didn't go straight into PM, right? I started in finance, converted into PM. And for me, there were 2 big things that really allowed me to make that switch. One, to Neil's point, was working on different side projects, working on class projects while I was in Berkeley. And not only is that like good resume fodder, and not only is that helpful from the standpoint of understanding the role, but it also gives you a sense of whether it's something that you want to do. Do you actually enjoy being in that position or not when you're working on these projects? But number 2, the second biggest thing, and this is something I encourage a lot of students to do, is try to get technical. Like I think studying computer science, even just minoring in it, is a real way to sort of differentiate yourself from some of the other people who are going into this profession. And as a PM, you don't have to be technical. You know, I wasn't the most technical PM, but I did have the minor in computer science. And so I think, you know, in Berkeley and college in general, you're at a unique position where, you know, your sole goal is to learn as much as you can. And one of the beautiful things about going into the technology profession is it's all based around this foundation of computer science. And so it never hurts to learn it, even if you aren't going to be an engineer. But also going in through the engineering route and transitioning into a product manager is a good way to become a product manager at the end of the day, if you're not able to break in directly. So that's advice I give to a lot of students, is like, try to don't be scared to get a little bit more technical, because I think it'll only help you down the road.
Yeah, that's like really great advice, and I think that like ultimately like that's a question like a lot of people like even us like have on our minds, and so like it definitely helps to get like some like first person kind of like um advice on that. Um, Pranay, did you want to add anything?
I guess no, since we're also running out of time, I'd like let's wrap up now. And it seems like we have gotten like a lot of questions answered just through the discussion itself on Menti. So once again, I'd just like to thank everyone for you guys' time. You guys brought some amazing insights about like the PM role and like I guess gave us interesting tips and insights about like what we can actually expect for PMs. Cause like I know as a Berkeley student, like I've heard people like talk about PMs, and it's kind of different than how you guys have explained it today. So thanks for that. It's been really eye opening, at least for me. So
Yeah,
yeah,
really, really, really great insights. I really, really appreciate it. I gained a lot out of it, and I know a lot of our participants did too. So, and we'll be posting this, on the recording to like the rest of the people who are registered for PlexHacks, so they can watch it as well and learn. So, thank you so much.
Yeah, definitely. Thanks for having us on. And, when I was a student, I didn't know anything about PM. So I'm happy to share back some of that knowledge. And hopefully, people now graduating will know a lot more about it.
Yeah, no, really, really appreciate y'all taking the time. And I think it's worth, really doing your homework to find out what you want to do when you graduate. Like PM isn't the only path. There's so many different paths to take. I know it can be easy to sort of think about what's the hot thing that everyone's trying to do, but I think it is worth doing the homework for yourself to decide what truly do you want to do. So that's the last thing I'd probably encourage as well.